There are different schools of thought when it comes to strategy. Some see strategy as simply planning, defining the outcomes you want and mindful of the organisation's capabilities and culture, charting a course for how you're going to get there. Others see it as positioning, how you're going to compete or sidestep your competition or align your efforts to seize opportunity. And there are those who see it as linked to your why, tied to this idea that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So in this podcast, we want to talk about setting strategy in organizations with complex governance. And we want to explore the challenge of setting future direction when the expectation on your organization is incredibly broad and not narrow. So to help us in this conversation, I'm joined by Kelly O'Shannessy. Kel's the CEO of the Australian Conservation Foundation. She's a highly respected executive with a career spanning business and government and the not-for-profit sector. She's the former CEO of Environment Victoria, was a senior exec in state government, has worked in water and waste management and pollution control. There's a very long list here. Kel's uniquely placed to talk about the challenges of developing strategy in not-for-profit and government, where community and business and government interests sometimes can be really broad and occasionally not complementary. Kel, thanks for speaking with me.
Oh, you're welcome. What an intro.
Yeah, I know. It sounds more professional than it actually is.
Yeah, and the task at hand is big. Sometimes when you stand back and have a look at it, but you chunk it down every day and you get through it. So it's okay.
Well, yeah, and I guess this is kind of the first question, like because this idea of strategy, like a big component of strategy is vision. So for you, what is a vision in a strategy and how important is it?
Well, I think your vision of your organization is probably your most important thing. So, we've got mission, vision, or purpose, and change strategies and theories and goals and all these sorts of things, and they're all important. But I think your vision is probably the most important thing because it sort of does two things. One provides direction. It's your North Star or Southern Cross if you're an Aussie, and I like to use the Southern Cross analogy at ACF.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Anything you do will get you there if you don't know where you're going. So you need to know where you're going, and that needs to be as far off as possible, really, I think. And so, for example, at ACF, our vision is ridiculously big, which is a world where wildlife and people and our rivers and trees and forests thrive and live in harmony together. It's not actually impossible. It seems a long way from where we are because I think today it's much more about conflict and exploiting and using and dominating nature, and jobs versus the environment, which is, just never been accurate.
Well, and you kind of want a vision that's compelling too, a little bit aspirational.
Exactly.
Like somewhere there's a balance there, though, isn't there, between being.
Yeah. So you break it down. So I think your vision gives you that big direction, and then what we have done at ACF is we break it down then into goal areas, and those goals are much more tangible. So we would have goals over 1, 3, and 10 years.
Yeah.
And those goals might be around what we want for nature and climate. That's 2 areas. But ACF also works on changing how our economy works so that it's a force for good for nature and climate, not a force of destruction, and also strengthening our democracy because, nature is something that we all contribute to and can help protect and can also all be part of its demise if we don't do things differently. So it is going to take a strong democracy. So I think you can break it. You have the aspiration, you have the direction, you break it down with the goals. But the reason why you need the aspiration and direction is the second thing for me about why vision is so important. And that's because it gives you purpose. It gives your organization purpose. It gives people something every single day to wake up to. We're locked down here, so every day is kind of like the same. And for me, I stare out at the river, the Yarra River there, or the trees on the other side of the river, and I remember that's the thing that I'm trying to protect. So that's the purpose, and that's what binds us all together, and it forms the team.
Well, and something really tangible about having a vision that actually connects to something you can see, because, I see these really lofty visions and I'm like, how are you ever going to measure that you got anywhere near that? Whereas if you can see the thing, that's a pretty good start. So, setting a vision is tricky because you're trying to narrow the field a bit. How much harder is it to do that in an organization that is complex? And when I say complex, can you talk a bit about, what makes an organization complex from a governance standpoint?
Yeah, so I think God, we have a complex governance at ACF because we have a membership and a supporter base and a donor base for starters. So our base is sort of coming from 3 different areas, and it's large and growing massively. And then that base sort of forms and elects a council of 20 odd people, and then that council elects the board, and then the board operates like any other board. But you do have a lot of people who have an important view about what your organisation should do. And the complexity actually comes from every one of those people is different. Boards, we have 11 people on our board. That's not an entity, that's 11 different people with 11 different views sometimes on what your strategy or vision should be. So the complexity, I think, comes from we are all individuals and different. And no matter how you group us, that individuality is always going to be there. And I think it's ever more complex in a change-making organisation like ACF, an advocacy organisation. Advocacy is about changing what is to what should be. And where the complexity comes is we might all share a vision and we might all share those goals, but sometimes we have different views about how we should achieve them. And so at ACF, we also have a change strategy. And we actually have a strategy on a page at ACF. It's on every single wall when we had walls back in the olden days. When we had them.
When we went into buildings.
Yeah, so everyone can sort of tell you what our purpose and goals are, which is on one side of our strategy on a page. On the other side is our vision and goals. And on the other side is our purpose and our change strategy, how we create change. And that's important to write down because that's the areas you build capability around. And so that can help cut through the complexity if you have that level of clarity. But of course, to get everyone on the same page, you need to do a lot of work. And I think you need to involve everyone. No leader can come in and just write something down or say something and, that's your strategy. You actually have to engage people, listen to them because they'll have bloody good ideas, and develop that together. And that's what we.
And in that diversity, like you mentioned the idea that, particularly with boards, because they're not an entity, and having reported to a board as a not-for-profit as well, when I was CEO of an organization, like I found the board, that diversity created a real mix of views, and that mix of views created a compelling picture of what the future would look like from quite different angles and different dimensions. It also created a challenge to consolidate that future into a single narrative that made sense, that you could communicate. We managed to do that, and that was quite an enlightened process for me to be involved with. But how do you balance up the competing views and competing interests of what your organization will do from its members or from the stakeholders or from the businesses you interact with the internal picture of what you think is achievable? Like, how do you balance up these two extremes?
Yeah, well, I think one is the first part is what we just talked about. So you bring people through the process together and you develop it together as much as you can, depending on the size of your organization. But no matter how big or small your organization is, there's always ways that you can use to make sure everyone can have a go and say in the vision and the strategy of your organization. So you need to do that, because by doing that, you're helping people understand. They're coming to their own conclusion that we have to choose what we work on. If we try and do 8 billion things, and as the National Environment Organization, we are under a ton of pressure to do and fix the 8 billion problems to do with nature and climate. And we have to choose, because we will be highly unsuccessful if we take on too much. And actually, over the last few years, we've narrowed. So people have to be involved in those choices of narrowing. Otherwise, you're never going to get that sort of harmony. And then I think you have to, through doing that process, I think helping people understand what it looks like if you don't do that. So what impact could we have on something we hold very dear to us if we are trying to do, 10 other things at ACF? So, the art of getting people to get to a conclusion is by looking at all of the sides and all of the information and then choosing the best pathway forward, not sort of, telling people this is it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I think some people form the view, strategy as a planning concept. They go, well, we should just do this efficiently, and having to have this, diverge and then converge conversation takes too long, and then we're not adaptive. Whereas what I'm hearing from you is there's a lot of strength in that diversity. There's a lot of strength in the plurality of views to nail down a vision that's compelling. Like, what's the trade-off between efficiency and diversity?
Yeah, great question. I really love diversity, and because it makes for better decisions and makes for better organization. So, and there's other reasons why it's really important. But for me, if you just put your good old CEO hat on, you should encourage diversity in all its forms because it will make for a better organization. Now, it's harder, it's more
Mm.
challenging, and it's going to be maybe it's less efficient to start with as you're figuring out, but I think the effectiveness and the impact is possibly greater. So we often think about impact at ACF rather than just efficiency, or efficiency and effectiveness together,
Yeah.
because I think you can trade one off and get greater efficiency, but you're actually not getting the impact down the road from the reason why you just decided to invest in diversity in the first place. So um, I, I I think if you tackle problems really at the start of the problem, so say you've got a board, lots of different views on what your goal should be or your strategy should be, then tackle that early,
Mm.
because
Yep.
trying to not do it early is not going to be efficient. So I think that efficiency, you get the impact and effectiveness sooner if you really tackle whatever the issue around diversity is, or whatever that diversity is pushing up. But I have seen many times with our board at ACF, just walking out of that board meeting going, oh, geez, that was really good. Like that was a brilliant thought from that person there. And so sometimes you also just have to take the challenges with the great gifts that things offer. Like
Yeah.
the world is
Yep.
imperfect,
Yep.
and I'm a bit of a believer in your great strengths have weaknesses. But if you try and round off those weaknesses, you are going to lose your great strengths. So grab hold of them, grab hold
Yeah.
of those strengths and
Oh
lean
yeah.
into those.
Yeah. Focus it
And the
like it.
weaknesses are that, look, reduce them as much as you can, but they're the opposite of that, and they're just there. That's
Yeah.
where it's okay.
I would agree. I think you focus on your strengths. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
I remember having this amazing insight with the board I was reporting to, where I realized that they weren't a group of individuals. Um, they were a team, and I needed to think about them like a team. And so I started investing a lot more in them as people, as a collective, and the change was quite significant. So yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying. I think vision's incredibly important. That diversity of view is important to help narrow down a compelling vision. And I think sometimes it doesn't matter how complex the governance is if you've got good structures to support here and consolidate those views. How does that look different in government? So, you've been involved in setting government strategy, like water planning for, a 50-year time horizon. So what's the difference in government to NGOs around strategy setting?
Well, I think government. Well, I think I don't know whether government has very good strategy anymore. Let me be honest. I think it's become so politicized. Certainly in the area that I work in environment and climate. I mean, we all can see that a million miles away, and it's become so politicized that it's much more of about the day or winning the battle
Mm,
of the day or the sitting, and it's much more about Parliament than it is about strategy in departments or statutory authorities. That said, having worked with you, well, I'm not sure we ever crossed over actually at EPA, but both having worked at EPA, I do see that there is clear strategy and strong governance in government bodies.
yeah.
And some government bodies are doing some of the most innovative work. So I've worked in the water industry, as you pointed out, and I still think that is such an innovative industry. some of them in particular just are leading the world in. Australia is a world leader in many elements of sort of urban water and even rural water management. So I think government's not one whole thing,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
if you
Yeah.
had to put it down to something, I think it's harder to set strategy in government because ultimately if it's important enough, it's going to be set by the politicians. So the things I worked on, the 50-year water planning, there was a really great politician that we were working to. John Thwaites was the Deputy Premier and the Water Minister, and he loved it when you would go in there and say, oh, what about this? Or, got a thought, or, he's really quite open and really had a long view. And I think that those sorts of ministers or departmental heads make the best strategies because they've got the long view, which of course is mostly what your strategy is. And then you need the agility in how you deliver it. You need to keep moving and be agile. And I suppose most people would look at government and say probably the least agile entity, of business, non-profits and government. Maybe you would think that. But again, I don't think that's consistent. So I think it's probably easier to set strategy now that I'm in the non-profit world, because I don't have to worry about the politics.
Yeah.
I set it, based on other parameters.
So that idea of complex, like effectively, reflecting on government as a complex structure that seeks to listen to a huge array of views by virtue of the people who elect the politicians in the first place. In your experience, is it a characteristic of that structure, or is it about having great leaders in government, like you mentioned Thwaites? Like, how much of it is to do with the just structure of government versus how much is it to do with really great leaders within government who can set a vision, who can rally people around?
Yeah, I think, man, I'm a really big believer in leadership too. And I think we can all be leaders in our own way. It's not a position, but those in those positions of leadership need to be great leaders. And I look around, in our governments, and I want to see more of those incredible leaders that will talk 10, 20, 30 years into the future, so they have that vision. And I don't see a lot of that, but we do see it in Australia, but we are seeing it around the world. And, a lot of us are looking to New Zealand and other places. Just sometimes politicians who are willing to just speak outside the day, month, year, and the politics and into an idea of what might be great for the country. I would love to just see more of that. And I think if you had leaders who did that more in our politics, then that might also then lead to change in your structure of government and how you might form the government agencies to deliver on that big idea. So I think that the appointment of leaders within agencies is politicized. And I just think there's tons of evidence to back that up, particularly, we've uncovered time after time after time how ministerial decisions on the environment are just completely politicized. And so if we, from departments, not just from the politics itself. So if you had that sort of idea, that person who can see beyond the day and beyond the partisanship, and there are some politicians in Australia that I really like, that from both sides or all sides of the aisle, that I look to and I go, oh, I love how you think, how you're actually thinking about the issue, not about only your party. So yeah, I think actually it's both, and I people have lost faith in government in Australia. The evidence is showing that very strongly. That's really sad because we need good government to do great things for the public, and we need to really build that up. And so that's a real challenge for a group like ACF as well, because sometimes, quite a lot of the time, you have to criticize a government for doing something bad, but you don't want to diminish the role of government while you're doing that critique.
Yeah.
It's a tricky situation.
Yeah, because government, so government, what I'm hearing from you and your experience is that, government largely at the departmental level probably can send good strategy, but if that vision is tied to something much broader, much bigger, then it requires a more senior level of government or a more senior level of government official to set the course and the direction. It seems that example of Thwaites is one where he was the deputy premier. also the environment and the water minister. He was well placed to set that forward vision. So in that sense, complexity doesn't play that much of a role. It's more around leadership. Can I ask a slightly
Yeah.
different question? So let's say for example that it isn't about complexity, it's just about leadership and getting people together and getting them around a shared vision. How do you hold people to that vision? How do you make it sticky so that you don't end up drifting or getting mission drift?
Yeah, well, I think you make your vision very compelling to start with, so people and easy. Not we at the start of this we talked about a whole lot of fancy words stuck together in your vision and mission, and we're like, yeah.
Yeah.
So it needs to be something you can repeat over and over again, maybe using different words, but the same sentiment comes out, and so that people are repeating it, so it does become sticky. And then I think you obviously then set up your accountability in your organization around your vision and your goals. So your accountability mechanisms, KPIs, etc., will all be set up around those things, and then people will keep being drawn back to delivering on those. At ACF, we have, as I said, we've got it on the wall, and every single conversation that we have at ACF, when we're planning a new campaign or we're planning a new element of a campaign, we've always go back to looking at um, how does this help us meet our goal and vision, and how does this help build our capacities in our theory of change. Because again, the other trick is to get change, you can't use 25 different ways to achieve it, because you can't build 25 different capabilities in an organization of ACF which has 80 people. So you do need to really decide what are your biggest levers that you can pull to create change, and then invest in those. And so, yeah, I think that's, so you excite people about it. You keep it really simple, but you make it like, you just make it something that's inspiring people, that they can see every day. And as you just said at the start, that we can see out in the world as well. And you celebrate the moments in when, you get a little bit more towards your vision. We do that a lot at ACF, and on purpose, because, geez, it's a bit of a hard slog if you're thinking about trying to protect, stop climate change, or stop the extinction crisis. No single outcome that we achieve is going to solve those. So you do have to celebrate the advances along the way, because that gives you energy to keep going.
Yeah, yeah, and I think celebrating little successes, that drives a
Big
really
success.
aspirational, productive culture. Celebrating the little wins that contribute to the big win. I do think that keeps people going. Um, I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I think um, what I'm certainly taking away is that I think organizations need to be really super clear on their why. Why they exist and where they're going. And to your
Yep.
point, be crystal clear on your how. What is your key theory of change? What is your main driver to achieve that vision? Um, and it's evident, and even in the examples you give, that good strategy is more than just defining success and saying how you're going to get there. It goes to that collective understanding of the want and will to achieve that thing, and people wanting to throw their energy and effort at this picture of a bigger vision that they can buy into. Final question for me, like if you reflect on the different organizations you've worked in, is this complex arrangement of people and boards and members, is that really a downward pressure on making strategy difficult, or is that just a convenient excuse for some that can't drive strategy through complex organizations?
Look, it's harder. Um, so it feels like in my job, the most common answer to a question is no, because we get a lot of people asking us to do a lot of things. There's a lot of issues from local to national, and we can't do it all. We have to know who we are and what we can do and our purpose, and how that purpose links down to their local issue, and talk to them and explain that to people. So yeah, I think you take the job, and the job's hard, so do it, and do it well, and do it with intelligence and humility, and care for every other person that you're working with. And you know, I love The West Wing, and there's a line in there: if you just say no with empathy, you'll be okay. So I think you know, if every time I've done strategy in difficult situations, and I suppose that's been in progressive organizations that want to do everything, and in government where you've got the politics overlay, you know, I think one, you keep it very simple, because, and it should be a touchstone. So we've talked about that a few times, but if your strategy and your vision is not your touchstone, then you're never going to be able to bring people together.
Yeah.
It has to stay high level and agile, because planning and predicting strategy is no longer the case in this exponentially changing world. So experimentation and adaptation. But what you must know, and this is the third thing, is who you are and your why. Because if you don't know that, nothing else is going to work. And that you keep coming back to that. That is your basis. And that is what you look at and touch every day to make sure that your work has impact every day.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's that whole adage of you can do 3 things well or 10 things badly, and knowing your why will help you do that. Cal, it has been an absolute pleasure. I think that, you know, what I, you know, sort of hear is that collective imagining of what you'd like to be and what you'd like the world to be, and understanding your role in that, and really being honest about reconciling what you can truly do and what you can't, will enable you to set a vision and more likely deliver on it. It's been a pleasure, Cal. Thanks for your time and for giving us your insights and thoughts.
My pleasure. Great chatting to you.
Clap, clap.